If someone embarrasses you in front of their friends, how would you feel? It's not always loud or cruel. Sometimes it's just the way laughter echoes around a table, too sharp, too long, while your heart folds in on itself. That's how it was that night. His family had invited me over for dinner, something they rarely did. I'd spent all day trying to make a good impression, carefully choosing a dress that wasn't too formal or too plain, rehearsing polite small talk in my head. They were people who judged quietly, through raised eyebrows and polite smiles. Mark, my husband, knew that. But he didn't care. We'd barely made it to the main course when his mother asked me about my new project. "So, how's work?" she said, in that tight, polite tone that suggested she wasn't actually curious. I opened my mouth to answer, to explain how proud I was of what I'd built from nothing. When Mark cut me off, "She means her little blog," he said, smirking at his father. "She spends hours writing nonsense and thinks she's changing the world." The table went quiet for a second before his brother snorted, and his mother smiled, the kind of smile people use when they're trying not to laugh too openly. I felt the heat rise to my face. "It's not nonsense," I said softly. "Oh, come on," Mark interrupted again. "You wouldn't understand real work even if it hit you in the face. You're smart, sure, but you're not exactly academic." His father chuckled, lifting his glass. "She's a creative type, Mark. Not everyone has your brain." And then Mark laughed. "Yeah, if she had my brain, she might have gone to college too." The words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because I'd trusted him with that part of me, the shame of never finishing school, the quiet guilt of watching others get degrees while I worked double shifts. I'd told him that story in confidence, and now he'd turned it into a joke. They all laughed again, a chorus of polite cruelty. I stared down at my plate, pretending to fix my napkin, pretending my hands weren't trembling. When the laughter died down, his mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "Don't worry, dear," she said sweetly. "You're doing your best. That was worse." Pity always is. Mark leaned back in his chair, satisfied, his arm brushing mine as if we were still a team. "She's sensitive," he added with a smirk. "Don't take her quietness personally." I wanted to say something, anything, but I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I was processing. Because behind all that laughter, something in me had snapped out later that night as we drove home. He tried to make small talk like nothing had happened. When I didn't respond, he sighed. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. You know I was joking." "Were you?" I asked. My voice sounded calm, too calm. He glanced at me, confused by the lack of anger. "You're overreacting." "You always do." "That's your problem." I looked out the window. The reflection of the streetlights moved across the glass like passing thoughts. "Do you think I'm dumb, Mark?" He didn't answer right away. "You're not dumb," he said finally. "Just different." "Different how?" "You don't think like educated people. It's not your fault, really. You just don't get certain things." There it was, the truth, bare and casual. The kind of cruelty that doesn't shout, it just exists. That night, while he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the dinner, the laughter, the way his words rolled off his tongue so easily. Like he'd been waiting for that moment, and maybe he had. Maybe he'd always seen me as less, someone who needed him to feel superior. But the thing about people like Mark is, they always forget who they are when no one's watching. They forget the things they hide, the lies they tell to build the illusion of success. I knew about his degree, or rather, the one he claimed to have. The one he boasted about at every party, every meeting, every family dinner. The one that didn't exist. He'd faked it years ago. I found out by accident when helping him renew a job application. The university had no record of his graduation. I confronted him back then, but he begged me not to tell anyone, said it would ruin his career, his reputation, his life. I'd kept that secret, out of love, out of loyalty. But that night, when he looked at me like I was beneath him, something inside me whispered, enough. He thought I was dumb. He thought I'd stay quiet forever. He was wrong. Revenge doesn't arrive with thunder. It walks in quietly, in measured steps. It waits until you stop crying, until the hurt turns into something steadier, colder. For days after that dinner, I barely spoke to Mark. He thought it was one of my moods. That I'd eventually soften, apologize, let him off easy like always. That was his pattern: insult, dismiss, then charm his way back into my good graces. But this time, I wasn't angry. I was calculating. When you've been underestimated long enough, you learn how to make silence work for you. I smiled when he walked in, nodded when he spoke, and played the role of the forgiving wife. Inside, though, I was rewinding every word, every smirk, every time he'd made me feel small. I didn't want to just hurt him back. I wanted him to feel seen, exposed. The first step was easy. His fake degree, that fragile piece of paper his entire image rested on, was the weapon. He'd built his career on it. His job, his promotions, his status. He even had the framed certificate hung proudly in his office, right behind his desk, the one he bragged about earning through grit and hard work. I knew the truth. He'd never graduated. He'd paid someone to fabricate the entire thing. The original email exchange with the man who made it was still in his old inbox, the one sent to our shared computer years ago. I'd never deleted it. So, one afternoon, while he was at work, I went searching. I dug through old folders, files, digital dust, until I found it. The emails were still there. Dates, payments, the fake university seal, all perfectly traceable. I printed everything. Then I made copies. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them, only that I needed them safe. It wasn't just about payback. It was about balance. About proving that intelligence isn't measured by degrees or certificates, but by how you rise after being made a fool. The next step came unexpectedly. His mother called one afternoon, all cheerful and oblivious. "We're hosting a family brunch this Sunday," she said. "Everyone will be there. It'll be lovely to see you smiling again, dear." I almost laughed. Perfect. That night, I told Mark I'd come. His eyes lit up, a mix of relief and arrogance. "See? I knew you couldn't stay mad," he said, wrapping his arm around me. "Let's just forget that dinner, all right?" I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. "Of course." But inside, I was counting days. I started preparing everything like a woman planning a celebration. Except mine wasn't for love. It was for liberation. I gathered proof: the fake degree, the emails, the timeline. I even found an HR file from his office in our home printer's history. He'd scanned his credentials for a background check. The irony made me want to laugh and cry all at once. By Saturday night, I had it all printed neatly in a folder. I labeled it simply, "For them." That evening, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. There was no fear left, only calm. My reflection looked like a woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for being underestimated. When Sunday came, the house was alive with chatter and the clinking of glasses. His family adored appearances. Everything had to look perfect. I greeted them politely, exchanged smiles, and endured small talk. Mark was in his element, laughing loudly, telling stories, playing the role of the successful son. He didn't even notice the folder in my bag. Halfway through the meal, his mother leaned over. "Mark, you must tell everyone about that promotion." He grinned. "Ah, yes. Director of Operations now. Took years of hard work, and my degree is finally paying off." The table erupted in praise. Compliments, toasts, admiration. I watched him, steady and quiet. He caught my gaze, smiling like a man who'd already won. That's when I spoke. "You should tell them where you graduated from, Mark," I said softly. The room stilled for a moment. He looked at me, unsure if I was teasing. "You already know where." "Don't start this again." "Of course," I said. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it in front of him. "Maybe you should show them the proof." His smile faltered. A subtle crack. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the folder and spread the papers across the table. Emails, receipts, transcripts that didn't exist. His family leaned forward, curiosity turning to confusion. His brother picked up one page, brow furrowed. "Mark, what is this?" His mother's hand trembled as she read the email chain. "Is this some kind of joke?" Mark's face turned pale. He tried to grab the papers, but I moved faster, my voice calm. "It's not a joke. He's been lying. About his degree. About everything." He stood up abruptly, anger rising in his throat. "You're insane. This is private." I looked at him then, really looked. The man who once called me dumb was now trembling, desperate to contain the truth he'd built his whole identity on. "No, Mark," I said quietly. "This is public now. Just like your insults were." Silence filled the room. No one laughed this time. His mother looked away, his father's face twisted in disappointment. His brother muttered something under his breath and pushed his chair back. Mark's voice broke. "Why would you do this to me?" I met his eyes. "Because you did it to me first." I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "You called me dumb in front of everyone. You made them laugh at me. But at least I never had to fake who I was to feel smart." And then I walked outside. The air was cool, sharp, clean. It felt like freedom. When I got home, I took off my heels, poured a glass of water, and sat by the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't destroy him. He did that himself. I just handed him the mirror. It's strange how silence feels different after a storm. The air doesn't hum with tension anymore. It hums with truth. And truth has its own kind of stillness. When I left that day, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd collapse on the kitchen floor, shaking from what I'd done. But instead, I made tea. I stood there, barefoot, watching the steam rise. It felt like something sacred, quiet, earned. The phone started ringing within the hour. His mother called first. I didn't answer. Then his brother. His co-workers. Even his best friend tried. I let every call go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear their shock or pity. I'd lived under their judgment long enough. By evening, Mark came home. The door slammed open, the sound sharp, brittle. He looked nothing like the man who'd stood so proudly at that dinner table. His face was pale, his eyes wild with anger and panic. "What did you do?" he asked, voice trembling. I looked at him, calm. "The truth. That's all." "You ruined my life?" he shouted. "Do you have any idea what this means? I could lose my job." I wanted to tell him he'd ruined mine long before this. That every insult, every smirk, every moment of humiliation had been its own quiet death. But I didn't. I just said, "Then maybe it's time you earn one honestly." He stood there, breathing hard. For a moment, I thought he'd throw something. But instead, he grabbed his keys and left. The echo of the door, slamming shut, was the sound of finality. That night, the house was still. No footsteps, no television, no shallow apologies trying to fill the air. Just peace, the kind I'd forgotten existed. Days passed. News spread faster than I expected. His company launched an internal investigation. Someone must have forwarded the proof, because HR called him in. He was suspended by the end of the week. His family stopped calling me altogether. Maybe they thought I'd destroyed him out of spite. Maybe they were too embarrassed to admit they'd enabled his arrogance for years. Either way, their silence was a relief. I started noticing things again. Small things. The sound of birds in the morning. The way light filtered through the curtains. The smell of coffee that no longer came with the tension of another argument. Sometimes, peace feels foreign at first. You keep waiting for the next fight, the next jab. But it doesn't come. You just learn to breathe again. A week later, he showed up at my door. He looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit. His posture had changed, his confidence stripped bare. He didn't even try to smile. "They fired me," he said quietly. I nodded. "I figured." He hesitated, glancing around the house like it was no longer his. "I can't believe you did this." "I didn't do it," I replied. "You did? Years ago. When you decided lying was easier than earning. When you decided mocking me made you feel taller." He sat down, head in his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you like that." I sighed. "You didn't care enough not to." He looked up then, eyes red, voice breaking. "So that's it? You're just done?" I wanted to feel pity. I really did. But pity is a luxury you can't afford for people who break you intentionally. "I've been done for a long time, Mark," I said. "You're just finally noticing." He left without another word. This time the door closed gently. After that, I started rebuilding. Slowly, quietly, the way healing always begins. I applied for a position I'd once been too afraid to reach for. I joined a community workshop, learned how to speak with confidence again, not to anyone else, but to myself. Each day, I found fragments of the woman I used to be, the one buried beneath his ridicule. The one who used to dream, laugh, and believe she could do things. A few months later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance. Mark was struggling to find work. His reputation had followed him, as truth always does. Apparently, no one wanted to hire a man with a forged degree. He'd moved in with his parents, the same people who'd once laughed at his dumb girlfriend. I should have felt satisfaction. But I didn't, just closure. Revenge had never been my goal. It was clarity. A way to free myself from the lie that I needed his validation to be worth something. I started writing during that time, journaling, mostly. At first it was anger. Then reflection. Then gratitude. I wrote about the night he humiliated me, how my hands shook under the table, how my throat ached from holding in tears. Then I wrote about the day I walked away, and how the silence afterward felt like a new beginning. Writing made it real, not the pain, but the strength that came after. Months passed before I saw him again. It was at a conference for a local business networking event. I was there as a guest speaker talking about rebuilding self-worth and career growth. I didn't expect to see him sitting in the audience, staring at me like he couldn't recognize the person standing on stage. After the talk, he approached me. "You're doing well," he said, his voice low. "I am," I replied. It took time. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Maybe he finally understood. I didn't need to be the woman behind his shadow anymore. I was the one standing in the light. That night, I went home and sat by the same window where I'd once waited for apologies that never came. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. I felt calm. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need revenge, or chaos, or fire. It just needs truth. And time. Because truth, the quiet kind, always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it doesn't just destroy the lie. It rebuilds the person who refused to stay buried under it. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't happen with grand gestures or triumphant speeches. It happens in the quiet moments, the mornings when you get up even though the world feels heavy, the nights when you choose peace over answers you'll never get. After Mark was gone, the silence in the house felt strange. For years, his presence had filled every corner, his voice, his criticisms, his arrogance. Now, it was just me. At first, that emptiness scared me. But slowly, I began to realize it wasn't emptiness at all. It was space. Space to breathe. To rebuild. The first few weeks were messy. I'd wake up and still set 2 cups on the table out of habit. I'd walk past his office door and feel that old tension rise, then remember it didn't matter anymore. Every little moment felt like learning how to exist again. I started taking long walks after dinner. No destination, no reason. Just movement. The air felt different without the weight of pretending. I noticed the sound of the trees, the hum of streetlights, and the way strangers smiled back when I met their eyes. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not by someone else, but by myself. I took on more work at the firm, volunteering for projects I'd always been too nervous to lead. My manager noticed. One afternoon, she called me into her office. "You've changed," she said. "You're more decisive, confident." I smiled, a little surprised by how true that sounded. Maybe I finally stopped doubting myself. She nodded. "Keep it that way." That simple validation, not from love, but from respect, did something to me. It reminded me that competence and confidence don't come from someone else's approval. They grow quietly when you stop apologizing for being capable. At night, I'd sit at my desk and write in my journal. The pages filled with reflections, not about him, but about me. The person I'd been before I lost myself in his shadow. The girl who once believed kindness was strength, not weakness. I missed her. So I started to find her again. I joined a support group for women who'd experienced emotional manipulation. I didn't speak at first. I just listened. Their stories sounded like echoes of my own, the same patterns, the same shame, but also the same spark of something that refused to die. Hope. One evening, during a session, someone said, "The hardest part of healing isn't letting go of them. It's forgiving yourself for staying." That line stayed with me for weeks, until one morning it finally made sense. I hadn't been weak for staying, I'd been hopeful. I believed people could change if they were loved enough. But love isn't supposed to cost you your dignity. Once I understood that, forgiveness came easier. Around that time, I began helping others, mentoring younger women at work, encouraging them to speak up, to stop shrinking themselves for approval. It wasn't something I planned. It just happened naturally. One of them, a quiet intern named Laura, once told me, "You make people feel safe." I think that was the greatest compliment I'd ever received. Because for years, I'd lived in fear, and now, I was the person who could help others out of it. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. A regional conference invited me to speak about leadership and resilience. I almost said no. The old me, the one who'd been told she was dumb, whispered that I wasn't qualified. But another voice, steadier now, said, "Why not you?" So I said yes. The night before the event, I stood in front of the mirror rehearsing. My hands trembled a little, but my reflection didn't look afraid. It looked determined. When I stepped onto that stage, lights flooding my face, the crowd blurred into soft shapes. I spoke about failure, growth, and the quiet courage of starting again. I didn't mention names or details, only lessons. About how strength isn't built in comfort, but in the ruins of what broke you. When the applause came, it didn't sound like validation. It sounded like closure. Afterward, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You said what I never could." I smiled. "Then maybe it's time you start." That night, as I drove home, the city lights looked softer, like the world itself had exhaled. I rolled down the window, feeling the wind brush against my face, carrying away what was left of the woman who once waited for someone else to define her worth. Mark's name still came up sometimes, through gossip or old acquaintances. They said he was working small jobs now, trying to rebuild. I didn't feel joy or bitterness hearing it. Just neutrality. We both had our lessons. Mine was to rise quietly. He was to fall loudly. One evening, as I closed my journal, I wrote a single line at the bottom of the page: "I am not what he said I was." I never was. And for the first time, I truly believed it. It's strange, isn't it? How pain can be a teacher when you stop fighting it. How silence can turn into strength once you stop fearing it. I didn't need to prove him wrong anymore. I already had. Simply by becoming someone who no longer needed his approval to exist. The truth is, the moment I stopped being his dumb girlfriend wasn't when I exposed him. It was when I started rebuilding myself afterward, quietly, deliberately, and without apology. Because sometimes, the loudest revenge isn't humiliation. It's a transformation. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of ordinary day you never expect to change anything. I was reviewing proposals for a major client at my firm when my assistant knocked on the door. "A representative from Titan Securities is here for the partnership meeting," she said. I nodded. "Send them in." The door opened, and my pen slipped from my fingers. Standing in the doorway, wearing a cheap suit and a forced smile, was Mark. For a moment, time folded in on itself. The same man who once mocked my every effort now stood in front of me, holding a folder that trembled slightly in his hands. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. His arrogance had deflated into something else entirely: survival. He cleared his throat. "Hi, I didn't know you worked here." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone even. "I don't work here, Mark. I run this division." His eyes flickered, that tiny movement of disbelief that told me he hadn't seen this coming. The man who once said I'd never make it past entry level was now here to convince me to sign a contract that could save his struggling company. "Please," he said, forcing a smile. "Maybe we can start over professionally?" I gestured toward the seat opposite me. "Have a seat. Let's talk business." As he sat, I watched him try to compose himself. Gone was the effortless confidence he once wore like armor. His hands fidgeted with the pen, his sentences stumbled. Every word seemed weighed down by unspoken regret. He went on about collaboration, about mutual benefit, about how tightened securities could bring value to our operations. I listened not to the words, but to the tone. The arrogance was gone. In its place was desperation dressed up as politeness. When he finished, I took a quiet breath. "I appreciate the presentation," I said, "but this isn't going to work." He blinked. "Wait, you're rejecting the deal?" "Yes," I met his gaze. "Your proposal lacks stability, your team's numbers are inconsistent, and frankly, your reputation doesn't align with the integrity this firm upholds." His jaw tightened. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, calm but firm. "And I am." Silence filled the room, heavy but clean. He sat back, the reality of it washing over him. I saw it in his face, the understanding that he was no longer in control of the story. For years, he painted me as weak. Now, he sat in front of the woman he once belittled, powerless. He exhaled sharply, his voice cracking. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" I studied him for a long moment before answering. "No, Mark, enjoyment isn't the word. Relief, maybe? Closure, definitely." He ran a hand through his hair, his pride crumbling by the second. "Look, I made mistakes, okay? I was stupid back then. I thought I needed to be the one in control. You intimidated me, and instead of admitting it, I made you small." For the first time, his tone was honest. But it didn't move me. "Not anymore. I don't hate you," I said. "You were part of the version of me that didn't know her worth. But I outgrew that." He looked up, eyes wet but defiant. "You've really changed." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped letting you define who I was." The meeting ended quietly. No yelling, no revenge speech, just signatures, handshakes, and the silence of power shifting hands. When he stood to leave, he hesitated by the door. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm proud of you." I nodded once. "You should be proud of yourself too, if you ever learn to start again the right way." He left without another word. The office felt different afterward, lighter. I stared at the door for a moment, then at the city skyline beyond my window. It struck me how poetic it was. Life had brought him back, not as a ghost to haunt me, but as a mirror to show me how far I'd come. Later that evening, I attended a charity gala, something I'd been sponsoring for months. The event was packed with business leaders, philanthropists, and executives. My speech that night wasn't about success or revenge. It was about resilience. I spoke of failure, of being underestimated, of how strength often comes disguised as survival. And as I looked out into the audience, I noticed familiar faces, some from the past, some new. But it didn't matter anymore who was watching. Afterward, as I stood alone by the balcony, a soft breeze brushed against my face. For the first time in years, I felt untethered from everything that had once hurt me. Because real power isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about never needing to. I took out my phone and typed a message to Laura, my former intern who'd become one of my closest allies. "We did it," she replied almost instantly. "Always knew you would," I smiled. That version of me who once cried in the dark, questioning her worth, she was gone. Not dead, just transformed. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with peace, the kind that comes when you've finally built a life that no one can take credit for but you. The night after the gala, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights flickering like quiet applause beneath the skyline. The noise of the evening had faded. No more cameras, no more handshakes, no more speeches. Just silence. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It didn't come like a wave or a sudden realization. It came quietly, like the way morning light seeps into a dark room. Soft and steady until you can finally see what's been there all along. I thought about Mark, not the man who once belittled me, but the one who sat across from me earlier that day, hollow, tired, unsure of himself. There was something almost tragic about him now. He had spent years chasing a version of success that depended on keeping others small. And in the end, that same hunger had starved him. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry anymore, just free. When I looked back, I realized my story had never really been about him. It was about the girl who used to shrink herself in crowded rooms, who hesitated to speak because she feared sounding dumb, who let his laughter define her intelligence. She had died quietly one day, not in pain, But in awakening, my company wasn't born out of spite. It was born out of survival. Every late night, every rejection, every whispered insult that used to echo in my head, I turned it all into fuel. Into something no one could take from me. That's the thing about humiliation. It burns at first, like acid. But given enough time and courage, it becomes polished. It teaches you how to shine without apology. A week later, I received an envelope on my desk. No return address. Just my name and handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a single note. I lost everything. But I hope you never lose what made you different. I'm sorry. Mark. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I folded it neatly and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk, not out of bitterness, but closure. Some apologies don't need answers. They just need to exist long enough to set you both free. Months passed. Business grew. My name started appearing in places it never had before: magazines, conferences, boardrooms where I was once only a quiet guest. And every time someone introduced me as the CEO, I smiled. Not out of pride, but because I remembered the dinner table where he'd called me dumb, and how I'd learned that brilliance doesn't need recognition to be real. Sometimes I'd see his name in the news, minor updates about his company struggling, bankruptcy rumors. I never felt satisfaction. Only distance. We weren't rivals anymore. We weren't anything. Just two stories that intersected once, long enough for one to crumble and the other to rise. One evening, while preparing for a keynote event, my assistant asked if I wanted to review the list of attendees. I skimmed the names, and there it was again, Mark Hensley. He was attending as part of a small consulting firm, barely a whisper of the man he used to be. I smiled faintly. No need to change anything, I told her. When the event came, I stood on stage beneath bright lights, speaking about resilience, adaptability, and the cost of underestimating quiet strength. My eyes scanned the crowd just once, and I saw him, sitting near the back, hands folded, listening. He didn't look away. Neither did I. When I finished, the applause echoed through the hall. It wasn't just for me, it was for every woman who'd been told she wasn't enough. Every person who'd been laughed at for dreaming quietly. After the event, I caught a glimpse of him slipping out through the side exit. He didn't approach me and I didn't call out. Some stories don't need sequels. That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, I felt something loosen inside me, the final thread of old pain unraveling. I had spent years trying to prove myself. Now I no longer needed to, because I finally understood strength isn't born from vengeance. It's born from endurance. From choosing dignity over destruction. From learning to stand tall even when no one's clapping at home. I placed the award I'd received that evening on my shelf beside an old photograph of me. In my early 20s, smiling beside him, still naive. Still eager to please. I looked at that photo and whispered, "Thank you. You taught me everything I needed to know about who I never want to be." And then I turned off the light. The world outside shimmered in gold and shadow, alive and endless. Somewhere, I imagined, he was rebuilding, maybe learning humility, maybe not. It didn't matter anymore, because the real victory wasn't that he'd fallen. It was that I had risen without needing to step on him to do it. Years later, I stopped thinking about him altogether. Not because I forced myself to forget, but because there came a day when remembering simply didn't hurt anymore. People often assume strength is loud, the kind that shouts, that proves, that wins. But I learned it's quieter than that. Real strength is the moment you stop rehearsing the pain and start living the peace that follows. I still pass the restaurant sometimes, the one where he humiliated me all those years ago. It's been renovated now, new owners, new lights, but I can still picture the scene if I close my eyes. His laughter, the uncomfortable silence. The way I smiled through it was because crying would have felt like surrender. I remember walking home that night, every step echoing with the weight of what I didn't yet know, that sometimes the worst moments of your life are just the soil where something unbreakable begins to grow. I didn't plan to become who I am now. I didn't plan the company, or the success, or the recognition. I just wanted peace, a place where I didn't have to apologize for existing. Everything else came as a result of learning how to stay standing when someone tries to fold you in half. If you'd told that girl, the one sitting in the bathroom stall, wiping her tears so no one would see, that she'd one day own the table she was mocked at, she wouldn't have believed you. She would have laughed, maybe even shrugged it off as a fantasy. But that's the beautiful cruelty of life. It always circles back, not to hurt you, but to test whether you've truly healed. And I did. Healing didn't mean I stopped remembering. It meant I could remember without shaking. People still ask me, sometimes, how I found the courage to face him again, to sit across from the man who once made me feel invisible and reject his business deal without flinching. The truth is, courage didn't arrive one day like lightning. It built itself quietly, in the long nights I worked late. In the mornings I showed up even when I doubted myself, in every small act of defiance that said, I'm still here. It's easy to tell a story like this and make it sound like triumph. But triumph wasn't the goal. Freedom was. And freedom isn't loud. It's the sound of breathing without fear. I keep his letter in a drawer. Sometimes I stumble across it while searching for something else, a reminder not of pain but of distance. The handwriting looks almost foreign to me now, like it belongs to a stranger. And maybe it does. Once, I thought his opinion of me was true. His words defined my limits. That being dumb was something I'd never escape. But life has a strange way of giving you new definitions, ones you write for yourself when the old ones no longer fit. I wrote mine in the ink of survival. Now, when I sit at my desk, the same desk where I built everything he said I couldn't, I often think about how easily people underestimate quietness. They confuse stillness with weakness, softness with stupidity. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means measured, intentional. It means knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the talking. When he called me dumb, he wasn't describing me. He was describing his fear of a woman who could think for herself, who could see through him, who didn't need his approval to feel complete. And now, when people come to me for advice, I tell them this: don't fight to prove them wrong. Build until their words no longer matter, because revenge may feel satisfying, but it's temporary. Success, peace, and self-respect, those stay. Those echo. I've learned that power isn't about control. It's about self-definition. So when I walk into boardrooms now, I don't carry the weight of his laughter with me. I carry my own. And it sounds nothing like mockery. It sounds like release. At the end of the day, all that's left of him is a memory, one that no longer hurts, one that taught me more than any mentor ever could. He was the storm. I became the aftermath, calm, uncheckable, and necessary. And if I ever see him again, I'll thank him, not for breaking me, but for forcing me to find the pieces worth keeping, because sometimes the cruelest thing someone can call you is the best thing that ever happens to you. I wasn't dumb. I was quiet. And quiet women rebuild the world in ways loud men never see coming.